What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the Sooner Surge. Before we get started, check out the fan stop at thefanstop.com for all your OU apparel needs. Sign up for the Shirt of the Month Club. Use code SURGE, get 10% off your first 3 months. Basketball season right around the corner. A week away from the OU to opening matchup against Lindenwood, LNC, 8 p.m. We have Brody Lusk joining us, OU insider, basketball guru here, Brody Lusk. Thanks for joining us. And Brody, let's just get right into it. Expectations not high from national people as OU picked 15th out of 16th at the SEC media days. But talk to us about expectations maybe within the program.
Yeah, I mean, the expectation is the same as it's been, the past couple of years. Make the tournament, and especially when you have Jaylen Moore and Sam Godwin, who sat there and watched them get snubbed from the tournament last year. I think even more so, there's a lot more hunger to get into the tournament this year than there has been in years past. This year's team has a great blend of guys who have been in the tournament at previous locations and guys who got snubbed from the tournament last year. So the expectation, it's definitely to be in the NCAA tournament. I don't think there's anyone in that building who expects them to finish 15th in the SEC. The expectation is for them to, outperform that by a lot. I think 15th is pretty low. I definitely expected them to be in that lower tier of the SEC, especially in a preseason media poll. But yeah, I think the expectation is definitely to make the tournament this year.
Hey, Brody, question. As far as you mentioned Jaylen Moore, you mentioned Sam Godwin, both guys that were on last year's team. But other than that, it's a lot of new faces. So just kind of give us at least 3 or 4 names that you think were going to be big time contributors this year.
Yeah, a lot of new faces. You've got obviously Godwin and Moore, and then you've got Luke Norweather and Jacob Fredson Cole, who redshirted last year. And then other than that, it's completely a new team. I just released like a roster breakdown over on OUinsider.com where I didn't just talk about like the stats. I actually broke down what Oklahoma's getting in each player. But to answer your question, 3 to 4 players, I would say you have to start with Jeremiah Fears, the program's highest rated recruit since Trey Young. He's a stud. He just turned 18 2 weeks ago. He had averaged 22 points on the EYBL, which is by far, some of the best competition you can play in the high school level. And he also played at AZ Compass, who was one of the best high school teams, last year. So he's played up his whole life. His brother's a starting point guard at Michigan State, but this is the guy who's going to be their point guard. He can play.
What's his measurables?
Yeah, I mean, he's 6'4", 180. So he's not by any means a small guard. Porter Moser says he's the fastest player on the team. He can shoot from all 3 levels. Really good outside shooter. But I would say, honestly, I think his best trait is his ability to just be a true point guard. He's going to get into the paint, and he's going to control the pace of the game. He's one of those players where he could give you 20 on any given night, but at the same time, he could score 6 points and have a big impact on the game. So I expect Jeremiah Fears to definitely be I think he'll be the leader scoring-wise of this team. Obviously, Jaylen Moore, the true leader of this team, but I think Jeremiah Fears, I think he'll be the guy. Late in the shot clock, that'll be him. So other names, I think you got to go with Jaylen Jones. Just really impressed over the fall. I mean, he's someone who has impressed everyone inside of that building with his shooting ability. He came in over from Long Beach State. He's a 3-and-D guy. Porter has compared him to Latrey Darthard, but he's a better version of that. He's 6'5". He's a lefty shooter, and he can really shoot it. He shot the ball so well that they're gonna end up starting him this year. So, he's that type of a shooter, really long defender. I think he's definitely a name to know. Duke Miles from High Point, 4th most efficient offensive player in the country last season. Now it is at High Point, but you're still getting a very efficient offensive scorer, averaged nearly 18 points at High Point. He'll likely be the 2 guard for Oklahoma this year. He's a scorer. He's a really underrated shooter, but he's someone who's going to be aggressive, not going to back down, and he's also a pretty solid defender. So I would say, those 3, and then you've got Kobe Elvis. I would look at him more of a facilitator instead of a scorer. You've got Mo Wagee off the bench, really kind of gives them something similar to Godwin, except he's very athletic and he's, a lob threat. So, they've got a pretty good group of newcomers coming in. Jeff Nwankwo was going to be a starter on this team, but Porter says he's out till December. I don't expect him to play this year, but yeah, so they got some good new guys.
Yeah, Brody, I want to ask you about two specific players in general. The first guy is Jacob Frederickson Cole. Obviously, he redshirted last year. As you said, could we see him contribute on this year's team? And second guy is a freshman out of Save, Oklahoma, and Dayton Forsyth. I know a lot of Sooner fans are familiar with this game out of high school. In my opinion, he was one of the most underrated players in the country last year, just due to the fact he played small high school ball in the state of Oklahoma. So could those two guys potentially sneak their way into the rotation and play big roles on this year's team?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think Dayton Forsyth was not a 3-star. That's a 4-star. But Jacob Fredson Cole redshirted last year. He's a big 6'7", nearly 6'8", long wing who can play the 3 and the 4. And so I definitely think he'll be involved this year. Very versatile on the defensive end. The question is his jumper, though. That was their biggest emphasis with him all throughout the redshirt year. But the way I look at it with Jacob Fredson Cole in the rotation is you have him, and then you have Bryson Goodine, who was the third best catch and shooter in the country last year. He's a phenomenal shooter off the catch. And then you have Glenn Taylor from St. John's, another long defender, versatile, can play the 3 and 4. So I think Jacob Fredson Cole will definitely be involved. He's someone I would list as a rotational piece. I think his minutes will fluctuate along with Goodine and Taylor. Now, Dayton Forsyth, I would list him as the 4th guard on this team. Everyone's going to list him there because you've got Fears, Miles, and then Kobe Elvis. So his minutes, I would probably label them as a question mark. I expect, those first 4 games before Atlantis, I think you'll see him. How much you see him in the Atlantis games, I think will probably be determined based on how he plays in the first 4 games. Do they want to use 4 guards? But I think there will be a point in the season where you need Dayton Forsyth because foul trouble or injuries or whatever. And I think he's someone who will be ready to come in. And I think he's the type of player who, once he gets that chance in the rotation, in that true rotation, that true 8-9 man rotation, I think he's someone who will probably just run with it from there.
Pace of play. I've heard Porter Moser say, they're gonna get up and down. Last year they kind of went to that. Yeah. OU under Porter Moser has been really good in non-con. That's a fact. Yeah. They've played really well early as they got in the conference schedule. The brutal toughness of the Big 12 has been when they faded. Of course, they're not in the Big 12 anymore, but I'm curious on pace of play. And then going back to Jaylen Jones, Brody, there was another lefty. I think he went about 6'7". Is Lamar Odom. Is it not? Why did I just say that? I just screwed that up. But I said Lamar Odom. Rashard Odom. Yeah, not NBA guy.
Okay, yeah.
Can Jaylen Jones, do you think he's a guy in the stat sheet that can do that much like Odoms did when he was at OU? You said he's a better shooter. I'm just wondering about all-around ability. Is he going to be – he's very long. He's not 6'7", but he is long, like you say. So pace of play and then maybe more on Jaylen Jones' game.
Yeah, pace of play, I'll say this. The word is that they're going to play much faster than they have in years past, and that's been a pretty big emphasis in practice so far. I'd like to see it. I do expect them to do that, but there comes a point when you're kind of like, well, we've heard this for the past 3 years. Let's see it. I expect them to play much faster. I think that'll definitely benefit Jaylen Moore. I think also, you can say, hey, we want to go fast. We want to go fast. And if your point guards don't want to play fast, you're not going to go as fast as you'd want. I think the benefit is that Jeremiah Fears, Kobe Elvis are 2 guys who are going to push the pace. That's what Jeremiah Fears does. He gets the ball, he's going to run. Kobe Elvis is going to do the same. I think that's one way Kobe Elvis will score most of his points is in transition. So I do expect them to play faster. That's kind of been what I've been hearing is they'll play faster, but we'll see. Jaylen Jones, the Rashad Odoms comparison, I think, is actually a good comparison on the defensive end because Jaylen Jones, he's got the versatility where he can stick him on a primary ball handler or he can, guard a 3 and he can switch onto a 4. But shooting-wise, way better than Odoms, obviously. I don't think he'll drive as much as Rashad Odoms did. I think, Jaylen Jones is just going to be more of a catch-and-shoot guy. I think Jeremiah Fears and Duke Miles will help him a lot by, getting paint touches and kicking it out to him. I think he'll be a very important player. I think the Odoms comparison, you got the lefty, but I think, defensive wise, that is definitely something that's definitely a comparison you could make.
Hey, couple of guys I want to talk about in kind of your comparisons and stuff. Godwin's been really good at OU. I mean, for specifically him not being on scholarship that first year, he's been really good. But then there's some games where it's just like it seems like it's tough to athleticism wise. When he's not on the floor, who's playing? That's my first question. Yeah. And who do they have that will be maybe that more athletic guy? I don't know. So that's one question. The other one would be this on Jeremiah Fears. Milos Uzan was a really good player, but I would like to know your opinion on the comparison between the two. Milos Uzan was kind of a pass first guy, in my opinion. Is Fears the opposite? Is he more of a scorer than Uzan?
So your first question, look, I know a lot of Oklahoma fans aren't going to like to hear this, and I kind of talked about this in my roster breakdown. I've been very vocal about this on Twitter. I think Sam Godwin has actually been a really good basketball player for Oklahoma, and I think he's going to take a step forward this year. Porter said that. I know a lot of people, your natural reaction is, roll your eyes at that. But, I mean, look, he obviously led the country in offensive rebounding, but I think he'll be more of a scorer this year. I'm going to release something later on the week over on OUinsider.com where I kind of make some bold predictions. And, man, I might have Godwin as their second leading scorer this year, just off of a prediction. So, and that's not me saying he's going to average 15 points, but I'm expecting him to take a step forward this year. I really am.
Hey, with that, though, don't you think last year a lot of times it seemed like he was gassed?
Yeah.
It seemed like he was – so they had it – so what I'm saying is when he's out, do they go small? Do they have the backup that can perform there? What do you think?
Yeah, and you mentioned his athleticism at the beginning of that question. I think there will be games where, not his matchup. But as far as, when he's out, Mo Waggy from Bama, the thing with him is he just got to stay out of foul trouble. He struggled with that at Bama.
How tall is he?
He's 6'10". So he's got height. He's very long, rim threat, athletic. I think he's the perfect big to, play behind Godwin. John Hughley could stretch it more last year. He could shoot the three. I actually think Sam Godwin will be shooting threes this year. So keep an eye on that. Something he's never done at OU. But, yeah, Mo Waggy, he's going to rim roll like Godwin. But, honestly, I think him and Jaylen Moore will split time at the backup five. I think Jaylen Moore, they're going to use him in small ball because he's athletic. They did it some last year. I think they'll do more of that this year. I think you can put, Jaylen at the 5 and Jacob Cole at the 4, or Jacob Fredson Cole. You have a ton of versatility there. But, I think Mo Waggy and Jaylen Moore are the two guys behind Godwin. But I do expect a big year from Godwin. Then you got Luke Norweather, who I think, when there's foul trouble, they'll probably need him. How much does he play? I'm not quite sure. I think Jaylen Moore and Mo Waggy will be seeing a lot more time at the 5. With Jeremiah Fears, I think – honestly, I think it's going to be game dependent with him. But I would say he kind of had – watching him, played for Indy Heat on the EYBL, watching him at Peach Jam, it just kind of seems like, he's going to make the right play. He kind of has that feel, and y'all know how good point guards are. We all watched Trae Young when he was at Oklahoma. Trae Young had a feel of, when does he need to go score and when does he need to go pass, right? And I'm not saying Jeremiah Fears is Trae Young, who's having a great year in the NBA this year, but I think Jeremiah Fears has that natural ability to make the right play when he needs to. I would expect to see him
better shooter than Milos.
Oh, way better shooter than Uzan. Way better. And he's going to be more confident, and he'll take some deep shots, right? So I think, honestly, if I was to give you an answer on more of a shooter or passer or scorer or passer, I would say scorer, just because I think on this team, they're going to need him to score more than they're going to need him to pass, right? I think, we saw McCollum last year be the guy late in the shot clock. That'll be Fears this year. So, yeah, I think, he's 6'4". He's just a natural point guard. Jeremiah Fears is. I think, he's an NBA talent. That's kind of been the feedback from not just OU people, but just from kind of everyone. I mean, he's got the height, the speed, and the skills, to be the best guard Oklahoma's seen out of here since Trae Young or, since Austin Reeves, one of those two. Yeah, I definitely think big year for him, this year.
Yeah, Brody. I want to ask you one about the kind of jump you think that Jaylen Moore can take, because last year he had the opportunity to potentially go to the NBA and he chose to come back to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And I think there was the argument that he was the best player outside of Suarez on last year's team. And then secondly, obviously you talked about the internal expectations for this team are much higher than what maybe the media sees Oklahoma as this year. What are your expectations for this year's team?
Yeah. So with Jaylen Moore, I don't think there's ever an option for him to go to the NBA. He just did that to obviously get the feedback. But, yeah, he did put his name in the NBA, just to test things out. But that's a good way for him to get feedback on what he needs to work on to make that next step, like you mentioned this year. So with him, I touched on this today with the roster breakdown. I'm not expecting him to go from like 11 to 16 points and just have like a massive rise in his, scoring. I really don't expect that. I think you're going to see maybe 13. I think you're, 13 points, maybe 12, maybe 11 like last year. I think that's kind of what you're going to get from Jaylen Moore. I definitely think, we think back to the Kansas State game where he had 20 last year. I think there'll be more games like that. But I think as far as the next step from him, I do think he'll take a next step, but I think that's going to be, him being a lockdown defender defensively, him making a very big impact on the offensive end, but maybe not scoring as much, grabbing rebounds. But I think he'll have some pretty big games where he'll go for like 20, but I'm not expecting him to lead this team in scoring. I think he's kind of, I think he's an 11 to 13 point guy. That if I was a betting man, that's kind of where I'd put him this year. But I think you'll see his rebounds go up. I think you'll see his blocks go up. And they're going to be very, creative with the way they use him defensively, and they'll use him at the 5 quite a bit this year. So my expectations for this team, right now I'd say bubble team. I can't say I expect them to make the tournament, right? Like, obviously that's the internal expectation. But for me, there's some things that I'd have to see in that, obviously I would like to say things that I have to see in the non-con schedule, but if we're basing it off that, then last year I would have thought this is a, 5 seed in the NCAA tournament, right? So I think they're a bubble team regardless. I think their floor is a bubble team, but I think their ceiling is probably, win a game or two in the NCAA tournament. I think that's what you get when you have someone like Jeremiah Fears. You can make a run, and Porter's always been good at making runs in every tournament he's been in. You can look at their non-con tournaments they've played in. They've won the last 2 they've played in. The problem is he just can't make it into the NCAA tournament to make a run there. So, yeah, I'm not going to come out and say, oh, this is the NCAA tournament team. I do think there's a strong chance. I expect OU to not be as bad as people are making them out to be. I think they will surprise some people. But I would confidently put them on the bubble right now. Whether they're getting in or not, I don't know.
Yeah, and for Porter Moser's future, I know people are chomping at the bit to get back to the NCAA tournament. And this year, the expectation is that. I think it's got to be that, and I know it is for them as well. Hey, Brody Lusk, thanks for joining us today. Brody Lusk with OU Insider joining us here on the Sooner Surge, giving expectations and breaking down this 2024-2025 team. Get started next week against Lindenwood. Thanks for watching the content here at the Sooner Surge. Make sure you subscribe and hit the like. We'll see you next time, Sooner Nation.